179 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshul Sag. Let's jump into my first topic, and I want to talk about Dish and could they be close to bankruptcy? And this is a subject that you and I, my friend, have talked about on podcasts in the past, but there was an article published by Fierce Wireless on the 6th that dives a little bit deeper into the possibility. And what really I think started this investigation was sort of around a lot of the announcements and that were coming out in January that indicated a reorganization of assets. And certainly that's not a determinant as to a bankruptcy, proceeding, but it's sort of a hint that something could be in store. And there's no secret, and we've talked about it, that Dish is pretty cash poor, and this whole merger with EchoStar was designed to sort of strengthen and boost the company. I don't know if you caught the article this week, but what do you think?
I did catch it only because of you. Um,
Okay.
Somehow I didn't see the whole thing about bankruptcy, but I delved a little more deeply into it. And there's actually a whole Wall Street Journal article about the fact that they scrapped their swap deal to push their debt maturity out. So
Right.
it feels like or sounds like they weren't able to secure that mechanism. And because that mechanism is no longer available to them, I think a lot of their debt is coming fairly soon. They're going to have to pay that debt somehow. And if they can't, they have to file for bankruptcy. And I have a feeling that this story on January 30th may have been the one to push the bankruptcy theory that if they can't, much have this, I think it was like $4 billion or something like that.
Right.
Um, if they can't, get that $4 billion out to 2030, it's going to be due pretty soon, and that's not easy to pay when your business is struggling. And to your point, when you're cash poor.
Yeah, the other thing to mention as well is that, they're under a deadline to have 75% coverage of the US population by mid-June of 2025. So the runway is fairly long for them. But yeah, I mean, this is quite interesting, sort of reading the tea leaves here, and it's something that you and I have speculated on, and we certainly don't want to take any joy in that happening because I'd like to see a very viable Dish. I'd like to see them focus on some unique service delivery and that sort of thing to differentiate themselves from the other really large mobile network operators in the US. But it is interesting, something to definitely keep tabs on. But let's go to your first topic, and you want to talk about China Mobile and their claim around launching its first 6G test satellite. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
Yes. So, China Daily, which is it's a Chinese government newspaper, they published a story that said that China Mobile is the world's largest telecom carrier by mobile subscribers, and
Mm-hmm.
they have successfully launched their first satellite to test 6G architecture,
Hmm.
making a milestone in its efforts to explore integrated space and ground communication technology. Um, and they said that this was jointly developed with the Chinese Academy of Sciences Innovation Academy for microsatellites. They said that the system, utilizing domestic software and hardware, that is very clear statement,
Yeah.
supports in-orbit software reconstruction, flexible deployment of core network functions, and automated management, enhancing the efficiency and reliability of the in-orbit operation of the satellite core network. They said that the orbit height is 500 kilometers, and that these experimental satellites, not singular, multiple,
Yeah.
offer advantages such as low latency and high data transfer rates compared to with high orbit satellites. So clear this is low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
Um, and they go into more detail saying that they consider this to be a crucial platform for future integrated space and ground communications of LEO satellites, and that China Mobile plans to conduct more in-orbit experiments based on these test satellites, but they didn't say what spectrum or why it's 6G. Um,
Yeah.
they say it's a 6G test satellite hosts a distributed autonomous architecture for 6G. All I know is, this is a Chinese, you know, well-known government publication quoting China Mobile, and
Yeah.
talking 6G, but there really isn't much meat here in terms of actual
No.
6G. So I picked this because it was kind of like um, kind of a dig at this, attempt to claim leadership. Because realistically, there's no 6G standard. We have no idea what's going to
No.
be 6G.
No.
So, yeah, I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first thought that I had was, hey, 3GPP hasn't even published standards, so how China can make this sort of claim is interesting, or how China Mobile can make this claim is interesting. And I think you've mentioned this type of satellite as far as, its distance and in orbit, and it's considerably shorter distance than even conventional low Earth orbit satellites, right?
Yeah, this is 500 kilometers.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not even, is that the stratosphere? I mean, I'm not a aeronautics expert, but yeah, it's just, so that's interesting. The much lower orbit, number one, and number two, the fact that 3GPP hasn't published any 6G standards, and we all know what was going on when 5G began to get its legs, and all the way back to 2017, 2018, and there were a lot of bold claims by China. And, we've reported some of these claims as well, as like, deploying the most 5G base stations and that sort of thing. And so it sounds to me like, they're beating their chest, but there isn't a lot of substance behind it. So
Yeah, by the way,
that's just my take.
I was just gonna add, NASA defines LEO as anything under 2,000 kilometers.
Oh, okay. All right. So it's within the envelope. Interesting. Well, I learned something new from you. That's awesome. Hey, let's go to my second topic, and I want to talk about Rakuten Symphony. And we've talked about the company on prior podcasts and their attempt to take their learnings and deploying highly disaggregated network infrastructure to support LTE and 5G, and then spin that into a business to help other mobile network operators do the same. And as we've reported in the past, they've stumbled. There's been a lot of management changes and shuffles. There was actually it was another Fierce Wireless article that I caught this week, and it talks about an executive that's coming back to the company, and his name is Raul Atri, and he's leading the OSS business unit, which is the operational software service layer, which is responsible for OSS and BSS. Not to get too techy, but it manages the automation and orchestration that's needed in really any network. And so, but he's coming back. He's focused on that business unit, but it seems like his remit's a little bit broader, because in this article, he talks about the power of AI, no surprise. And what uniquely positions Rakuten is that they had the foresight to put everything in one huge data lake. And so that could potentially give them an advantage in deploying AI workloads and doing some really interesting things from a telecommunications perspective. And you and I have talked about in the past how companies like AT&T are working with NVIDIA and deploying AI for more intelligent truck rolls. And certainly AI can do a lot of things from a self-healing perspective to ensure the right levels of quality of service and that sort of thing. But I thought it was interesting, there's a lot of whitewashing going on with AI, and it seems like Rakuten may be trying to lean into that to bring some luster back to what they're doing and actually grow their footprint with that business. So don't know if you caught the article, but any thoughts?
I didn't catch the article, but I did see him joining the company. So, um,
Yeah.
not completely out of the mix, but yeah, I do think that they do need some kind of spark. Maybe AI is their opportunity.
It seems, I mean, I don't want to call it lazy, but I mean, everyone's sort of pointing to AI and generative AI and what it's going to do to transform, digital experiences and that sort of thing. But it'll be interesting. So, again, he was with the company before, went to Tech Mahindra for 2 years, I believe, and now he is back. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Certainly there are other companies that are trying to do this. We've spoken about NTT and Orex and what they're doing with Open RAN. to sort of enable that ecosystem. And again, they're another example of a mobile network operator that's trying to provide blueprints and solutions to sort of ease this whole notion of deploying disaggregated infrastructure. But let's go to your second topic, and you want to talk about Verizon. And speaking of ORAN, a claim that they have made around their radio access network infrastructure.
Yeah, so basically they're saying that they have 130,000 ORAN capable radios, which include massive MIMO radios as part of their previously announced 15,000 compliant virtualized cell sites with ORAN compliant baseband units. And they're really pushing hard on ORAN. I think this is maybe a response to AT&T's announcement.
You bet
And
it is. You bet it is. Yeah.
But I think in general, this is a good thing for the industry. And yeah, I just think that it's a positive development. And they've been, working on VRAN, and they say that this is kind of the evolution as they, moved from VRAN to ORAN, and it makes sense to me. I've seen this evolution, but it's good to see Verizon is on this train as well.
And from my perspective, some of the motivation behind this may be the federal government. Verizon does quite a bit of business with the federal government, as does AT&T. And actually, when the news broke around the AT&T and Ericsson deal, I had a chance to speak with executives at AT&T, and I asked the question. It's like, is there, with Igali Baz, I asked him straight up, is there any motivation to do this to comply with federal government? And hey, the whole notion around ORAN is an attempt to domesticate the 5G supply chain when you look at the radio access network, part of the infrastructure here. So yeah, I think it's a great thing. ORAN does promise to bring certain CapEx and OpEx benefits. Agility. I think the biggest impact of ORAN is just the flexibility for mobile network operators to deploy infrastructure quickly and provide new service delivery, much more quickly as well. But all right, well, with that, let's head to my third and final topic. I want to talk about Ericsson and Qualcomm working with mobile network operator Elisa to demo some pretty blazingly fast uplink speeds and 5G standalone. So this involves a Qualcomm Snapdragon X75 5G modem RF system, which I'm sure you're very intimately familiar with because you talk about Qualcomm quite a bit on these podcasts, my friend. But in the trial, all three partners achieved, this is a pretty incredible upload speed, 230 megabits per second in a live 5G network. Now, this leveraged uplink carrier aggregation, and specifically the companies combined 25 megahertz, 2.6 gigahertz block with a 100 megahertz, 3.5 gigahertz block running on a mobile test device powered by a Snapdragon, again, X75 5G modem. That's pretty incredible, man, from an uplink perspective.
Yeah, what was the throughput?
What is the throughput? Why can't I find the throughput in this article that was posted to RCR Wireless? That's a good question. I may have to come back to you on that.
Yeah, because I always like to know what that full aggregation enables.
Yeah. I was just impressed, with that uplink speed. But yeah, I'm looking for it in the article, and it's not jumping out at me right now. But
Yeah, 230 megabits isn't bad.
yeah. Yeah.
And you
What
said,
else?
was that was a combination of what? Which bands again? 2.6.
2.6 and 3.5.
Okay, so it's mostly mid band.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's still
exactly.
pretty good.
But yeah, it's still pretty good. There was mention of another trial that Elisa did in 2022 with Nokia and Qualcomm, where they got, uplink, they got to uplink speeds of like 2.1 gigabits per second. But that obviously was millimeter wave. But
Yeah,
so
that's
yeah, so I mean for mid-band spectrum, that's decent, man.
funny because it's about a tenth in terms of speed.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, any final thoughts there before we move on to your third and final?
No, Elisa is definitely one of the leading partners for Ericsson and Qualcomm for a lot of these, you know, cutting edge network speeds.
Hmm.
I think they've also done some downlink millimeter wave stuff. So, there's not that many operators in Europe using millimeter wave. So, um, they're probably one of the few out there that's actually able to have it out in a commercial network.
Yeah.
And in this case, this is a mid-band upload. But yeah, I would kill for 230 megabits.
Yeah, I definitely would here in my home. Not quite there. I'm still in the country. I mean, hopefully fiber is going to come to Bastrop one of these days. But hey, man, let's move to your third and final topic. And you want to talk about there's some concern, I think, that's been raised by other mobile network operators around T-Mobile's additional purchase of some 2.5 gigahertz spectrum.
Yeah, so this is a ongoing story.
Yeah.
The Spectrum auction occurred in 2022, and there were a lot of things that prevented this spectrum from being released to T-Mobile. They were
Hmm.
they bid 90% of the spectrum that was available. So there weren't really um, operators who uh, competed with them for the spectrum, so they got it probably fairly cheaply.
Yeah.
But because the FCC lost their authorization to release a spectrum due to a dysfunctional government, um, they
Right.
weren't able to release a spectrum, and uh, there had to be a separate act passed through Congress called the SAIL Act, known as the 5G Spectrum Authority Licensing Enforcement Act, which was
Hmm.
passed. And that was to require the FCC to issue that Auction 108 spectrum license by March 18th, 2024. So they have about a month to release this spectrum. But in
Yeah.
the meantime, someone like AT&T has raised concerns that there are excessive levels of spectrum concentration. Um,
Hmm.
and they said that in two of Hawaii's five counties, T-Mobile would hold almost half of all spectrum suitable and available for the provision of mobile telephony and broadband services in Honolulu County, and T-Mobile would hold more than half. Um, I think this is an interesting situation because T-Mobile bid for this. AT&T
Yeah.
could have bid for it. They chose
Yeah.
not to. They didn't have any interest in the spectrum. And they honestly, the problem I think is, I think there is some valid concerns with T-Mobile necessarily having too much spectrum, and maybe being overly positioned. But if AT&T was serious about the spectrum, they would have bid on it, and they didn't. So,
Yeah.
and the reason why they didn't bid on it because they were never interested in it, because T-Mobile already owns the vast majority of 2.5 gigahertz. So it's not in their best interest to buy it because they're not going to really be able to deploy it nationwide. So
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense for them. This is something that should have been addressed a long time ago, wasn't. And at this point, they see as a competitive disadvantage. So they're just trying to block T-Mobile from getting it. And now that the FCC says they're going to review this spectrum release, but I don't even know if they have the authority to review it
Yeah.
if Congress has explicitly stated that the spectrum has to be released because the auction closed 2 years ago.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, and that's not a trivial amount of money to park for, a year and a half plus, right?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, it was a $300 million auction, um, and yeah, I mean, I just think that there's the problem with this is a lot of this spectrum is going to actually help to build out T-Mobile's network for rural areas. So
Hmm.
um, a lot of the spectrum isn't in that populated of areas. Um, because that's why this was a secondary 2.5 gigahertz auction. So I think this
Yeah.
is a good auction for T-Mobile. They should have the spectrum. If AT&T doesn't like it, it's way too late to complain about it. And
Yeah.
it's not like they're going to go and uh, deploy these licenses themselves. And they didn't bid on it. And that's the thing is like, I'd understand if they bid and won licenses and
It
they felt like
right.
get enough
Yeah.
licenses or something, but they weren't participating in it. So it's just like, I don't know. I don't feel bad.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting, but it's also interesting that the FCC is going to review the release. I mean, geez, crazy, man.
I feel
Well,
like
hey,
they
my
can
friend.
review it,
Yeah,
but I'm not really sure they can block it.
yeah, exactly. So what's the point in reviewing it? It's interesting. Yeah, we could go on and on about the federal government. But with that, it's been another great podcast. We had a few little technical glitches here, but why don't you take us home?
Well, we hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Wilson Tech, and I'm at Ashel Saad. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week. And don't forget to rate and subscribe.